Hi there, and welcome to the next GTM Hive Hive Mind podcast. Every week we explore a new subject which is designed to help SaaS companies drive revenue. This week we've got another very special episode. We have a former Chief Digital Officer and Chief Technology Officer from banks stretching from the Nordics all the way across to the Middle East. He's going to provide a unique perspective on how technology departments within banks really buy. I'd like to welcome today our special guest, Ewan Macleod. Ewan, thanks very much for joining us.
James, it's awesome to be here. Bring it on. Let's have a good dialogue.
Are you ready?
I am.
You ready for what I can throw at you?
Yes, hit me.
Good stuff. Great. Well, look, I think the first thing I'd love to kick off with is, when I talk to SaaS companies, one of the biggest things is they completely misunderstand how technology departments really buy. I'd love it if you could just talk from your perspective when a bank needs to buy an enterprise piece of technology, something six figures, needs to be integrated. Can you kind of walk through what that process looks like from your perspective?
Yes, right. Now, generally speaking, the first thing we all do inside the bank is go, oh no, right? Because life was good. Okay, now I say good, but typically if you're a CTO in technology, in banks, you are constantly worried. And I think it's useful to understand that when I say constantly worried, you carry responsibility for the connectivity, for the bank stuff running. And we only have to look at some recent headlines where, in fact, I changed my buying habits. The very nice Sainsbury's up the road, I did not go to one weekend. I went to Tesco because it was operational. Sainsbury's was not working with Apple Pay or anything because their payment capability was down. Now that's Sainsbury's, that's a supermarket chain, but you can imagine it's 100-fold more important for banks and their technology to be always up, always resilient. Now, so the steady state is some degree of mild panic, right? And ideally, everything is just okay. And then you introduce this need, we're going to have to buy a new thing. Right? We have processes, we have methodologies. The first one is, okay, so who does this? Who does this? So even before we've spoken to procurement, even before we've gone through the rigmarole, this process, we're already saying, look, just skip to the end. Who is it that does this? And this is something I think you have referred to quite often, James, is that kind of that pre-buying thing, because often the need will arise somehow, somewhere. We're in a committee meeting, we're in a conversation, something keeps failing, or there's a new requirement, and we go, right, okay, who is it does this? Now, often we've already identified, in many cases, the type of company or the solution we've seen or heard, because it's come to us through osmosis. It feels like osmosis, but through various different realities, we probably need a system that does that. And then we're into right. Well, how serious is this need, right? What kind of systems are we talking? Is this business critical? Now, generally speaking, in technology, everything is business critical. But how much can we push this off? Right? Is it required? Have we budgeted for it when it comes to all these kind of issues? But we have to do this thing. Okay, right? This goes on my the number 105 of the things that I'm panicking about now, right? Because I've got all these issues. I've got people issues. I've got regulatory challenges. I've got problems with the board, the C-level, etc. I've got X, Y, Z. This data center's failing. This thing, that thing, and we have to buy. Okay, right. So typically speaking, depending on the level, the scale, this is a project. We'll have some scoping funds. I'll often, the exec will come and say, we need a thing that does this. I'll go, right, okay, what's the best way of doing this correctly and not rushing into it, and also delaying where possible, because we don't want to just jump into stuff. We have to really think about the architecture here. What are we considering? Are we going to add a new thing in here? Oh my gosh, what's the run rate look like? Can we afford this? There's a whole host of conversations. So what I would do is say, scoping funds, right? You come here to one of the project management team, right? Okay, can you go and look at, go and investigate, go and see, they put a team together, 3 or 4 people, we're at £500,000 already. $500,000 already, right? You now look at this project, right? Because this is probably going to be a thing, right? We're going to plug in, we're going to replace, it's a serious conversation here, James, right? And this is before we've spoken to any vendors yet, right? We might have a few ideas, okay? Typically we do, right? And that, I think, is a very important aspect, right? How do we get those ideas? How do we hear about that, right? So we've got a few ideas of what's possible. We may have heard from that workshop or that round table or that event that other banks are doing this, and we knew this was coming. Right, you project team, go look, start the project, and there's, of course, really regimented ways of doing this. Engage procurement, engage legal, engage risk, engage compliance. We're thinking about doing this. We're thinking about looking at this. The architecture team, how are we going to, what do we need to think? Blah, blah, blah. So you can see this is quite a serious process, James.
I think that's a really interesting point, because a lot of the time salespeople, they tend to view these organizations as kind of very simplistically broken down into the business and the technology team, and viewing the technology team as kind of one person or one unified thing in itself is too simple. You even talked about it then. There's infrastructure, information security, or there's probably within technology another 10 sub-departments.
Right, and then are we doing this? Are we serious? Now, a really serious method is if we set up a project, right? So, for example, if we're going to replace core banking, add a new core banking, anything over 100,000, typically, we really need to think about, and anything into the millions, or total million spend per annum, for example, we are going to give enormous thought to, right? So, and we need to be professional about this, right? I had to explain to our management team, this is how we got here, and this is why we're doing it, and this is what our strategy is, right? So, and I need to buy into that, because it's my reputation, my teams, my colleagues, all of our reputations here, right? All of our bonuses, depending on selecting the right vendor, making sure we're doing the right thing. So often it's the scoping project, it's having a look at this. Sometimes it's informal in companies, but in many cases, especially in banks, I like this to be some degree formal, right? We are looking at the possibility of swapping that core banking software with something better, something new. Okay, now we're not doing that yet. We're doing the scoping. So I will, from my budget, say, Mr. Business, are you happy? Or often it's coming the other way, the business, we need you must. Okay. Right. Often I've had it, coming for the annual reviews or the budgeting process. I'll sit down with the head of business and remember he's paying. They're paying for me and the whole tech thing to exist typically. So I work for them. Right? We often like to pretend that's not the case, but ultimately I work for him or her. Right? And they say, we think we need a new core banking. Could you look at that? And you think, okay. So you understand how much that's going to cost, right? And that's going to wipe. Of course, we can't say that. You say yes. Let's have a look at that. Now, often what I would be doing is saying, we'll investigate that. That will be the project, right? We're not going to do it. Right, we're going to investigate it, going to look at this process, right? So that scoping activity, that methodology, if you're a big player, we've got to have serious conversation and dialogue about even thinking about the possibilities. So if you like, we're doing a project to think about, to investigate, to check, to review, to see, can we go and do this? Now, part of that process would be then maybe that whole thing includes an RFP. It may include an RFI, so requesting information from vendors. It may then, we might go and hire from the market. Right? Has anyone done this SAP weird, crazy thing? Get 2 contractors. This is why we're having scoping funds, right? Because we're not sure how this works. Has anyone go out to market, find a contractor, find an interim, find some people that have done this before, right? For other similar level, great, bring them in. And these people are 800, 1,000 a day. Dollars, pounds, whatever, right? So this is how project manager who doesn't necessarily know anything about that particular software, but they've hired in the expertise. And now this whole team is now engaging across the company, right? We haven't necessarily spoken to any vendors yet, but we're now going, okay, I think we're good. Like now we do an RFI. Guys, we're thinking about doing this. How would you do that? Now, how are we finding them? Those vendors, who are we speaking to first? What kind of desktop research is happening? Now, often you'll find we've got 2 contractors on the team doing this scoping, right, across 6 months, for example, and both contractors have used X vendor. So guess what? Yeah, that's going to be something that we're going to be quite aligned to potentially, right? But we'll go out to market with our procurement team, our processes, our own professionalism will make sure we are doing things the right way. Now that means assessing what's available in the marketplace and then beginning to zero in on the right vendors and approaches.
Oh, Ewan, I love that, because you start to give an indication of the sheer mass of this. And just to kind of pick up on a couple of things you've said there, like the requirements gathering phase, I know from salespeople's perspective, like the RFP that you're talking about, it lands on your email and everyone goes, oh, it's going to take 50 hours. And what you're telling us is that if it takes 50 hours for a vendor to respond, it takes 10x that to gather the requirements and send it in the first place. So sales guys, spare a thought for the bank and the amount of effort that they had to put into it.
That's it. Or, what can you do? What can you do to help accelerate this? Now, of course, we are going to look very carefully at any suggested material from vendors. But it can be quite helpful if you have an RFP guide. So you're thinking about, changing core banking, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of reality, those kind of, white papers, processes, really think about, how you can help those individuals, right? Because it's not me as a CTO or C-level. I'm not necessarily looking here. Now and again, I'll be Googling, right? That's right. So your hygiene you've got to make sure your hygiene's good. So the website, the process is all looking good. But it's those individuals that are out there responsible for this particular thing. They're out there engaging. They're maybe having some initial dialogues with vendors. If you've got some material, right? So you're thinking of moving core banking. So you're thinking of adding a new AML system. Here are the 5 things. Here are the 24 things we think you should be thinking about, right? Because you've done this all before, vendor, right? That can be very helpful to us. Often what I see
priceless, because again, this is another misnomer with salespeople, is they think that banks know how to buy, and the bank might know how to buy a thing, but the chances are that it's never bought a core banking system before, because you do that every 10 years.
Exactly.
So you're right, like salespeople need to be the guide and the expert as to how a bank can make that decision well.
This is it, and giving some. Of course, we're going to look at it, carefully. We understand it's coming from the vendor, but there are methodologies of just helping, right? Just helping. Often I'll see the vendor who says, here's a white paper about something that's just completely irrelevant to us, right? Next generation, blah, blah, blah. Cool. What we actually need to worry about is how do we buy this stuff, right? We've got all these teams we've got to brief. How are we going to brief them on this problem, on this issue? So, and the more that you can be helpful, the more confidence that comes to you, vendor, right? And it's fundamentally our decision processing that then reaches which vendor are we going to work with. There's a lot of people involved, and a lot of it is we're incredibly careful in the process, the acquisition process, right? We have to be whiter than white, but it's in those Excel spreadsheet calculations, right? This vendor, how do you rate their ability to do blah blah blah, right? It's all the same. For example, they're all the same, generally speaking, right? Vendors would not like that to hear that, but we go, okay, as far as we're concerned, it's basically, these 3 are basically the same. Okay, now it comes down to feeling, right? So I will fill in my weighting on that particular, on the, 0.7, 1.2, blah, 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 right? But then everybody else, right? And all of that's publicly available within the organization, right? Because I think this, I feel that, but we're all, the processing that we're going through is to make sure we are doing things in a demonstrable way, right? How do you get to that decision? We're very, very clear. But there's nothing stopping us being influenced, right? Because when I say, look, I'm going to give them 1.2, right? And this one, 1.1. I'll tell you why. Because, and then as long as you're justifying it, be very clear about why all of this influential aspect here is, I think it's useful to be, if you're the vendor, understand how this process is typically working, right? Understand how the importance of influence, the importance of providing the right information. Because typically speaking, I can see marketing directors and marketing teams just doing the absolute opposite to what the bank cares about.
And you touched upon the RFP there. Can you just explain a little bit why RFPs are so important from a bank's perspective?
So we're going to spend 10 million, for example, buying something, or 1 million buying something. But as many vendors watching know, that's not the actual cost, right? The actual cost can run 10 times, 100 times that, depending on how things are constructed, right? So we're spending a significant amount of money, so we need to be careful, right? Shareholders are expecting value for money, fundamentally. And then C-level, board members, all the various different stakeholders across the bank and externally, but particularly internally, are expecting value for money. Do the right thing. Buy the right system. So we collectively, in the technology team, for example, or in the business team, and in the business team, wherever, we all need to be really clear as to why we selected Microsoft, why we selected SAP, right? Because very quickly, things can go wrong, right? Rarely do these technology systems, do you click a button and they just work. In fact, there's often a lot of cultural issues. In fact, in many cases, the technology is quite easy. It's the people and the process and all of that. But at some point, someone will say, "Hey, hold on a minute. Why do we buy this? How do we select this? And you want to be very clear. Here's this is why, right? Here, every stage is documented very, very clearly. Why did you say 1.2? I said this. And why did we? And how do we get? Okay, and then the final reality, show us how do you got? Because we have to constantly justify to various different stakeholders, not least the regulator, right? How did you select, and why did you select that particular vendor? Now, in many cases, it may well be because we have an architectural committee that says we have to, it is agreed that we will go cloud first, or we will go on-prem first. And we've gone through it. Okay, we didn't select that vendor because they don't support this. Out, right? And why was that the case? Well, because we've been very clear on our policies, blah, blah, blah. All of this is really, really relevant later on. Of course, we want the best possible systems now, so that's another aspect. We have to justify to the business, look, we've scoured the market, we've had a look, we've got the requirements are very, very clear, and the only 5 vendors that could meet those requirements are XYZ. Major issue is then challenging those requirements, right? Why? Often you'll get all the way down, and then the business person's favorite vendor isn't included in the next round. That can get very political very quickly. Why? Well, because they didn't support this. Oh, change that. Right, but we're very clear it must be cloud first. No, I don't agree with that. Well, okay, it's the whole bank that's how we're doing it. It's cloud first, right? We don't run the stuff anymore. No. I would like you to revisit that. Okay.
And that's the paradox. So what you're describing, as I hear it, is when a decision is important enough that the bank can't afford for it to go wrong, they pull in multiple stakeholders. But of course, as soon as you've got lots of people throwing their 2 cents in, you get kind of vested interests in.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It sometimes comes down to a very senior executive saying, "No, I prefer that one." Okay, but that's not what we've. The output is saying this one. Yeah. Well, I want that one.
Do you think there's much truth in the comment that RFPs are won and lost before the exercise?
Everyone I've run, I've tried to do so, or everyone I've been responsible for, I've tried to do so with a very, very open mind. Because that discovery phase is really important if it's done correctly. Now, in many cases, it is done poorly. So that's where there is truth in that reality, right? But if you're facing into a highly professional, committed team of individuals in a bank with a track record of and a will and a wish to do the right thing, then I think there's everything to play for. right? And that, engaging correctly through that RFP process, I think is really important. But it's ideal if they know you beforehand, right? It's ideal if the bank and the vendors have been interacting, right? Because it's ultimately down to humans, right? Often during these processes, you think, okay, it's got to be this vendor, very clearly this vendor. Then they turn up. They turn up and they've effectively phoned it in. You say, look, does it work with AI? You're just asking a silly question. And they just say, yeah. Right, that's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted you to challenge me on the phrase AI because I was...
Or justify it.
Justify, yeah, I was being silly, right? Yeah. And you just went, yes, indicating, or, the individuals from that vendor are having a particularly bad day. They didn't bring their A game. And that's when we were making this, that's when the opinions were formed. So I think it depends who you're selling into, right? But if they're big, professional, they can afford, and often there is significant pressure to be doing things in a very, very clear, whiter than white manner. There may be some favorites, but that process, and then those procurement colleagues, your legal colleagues, all your different colleagues, in all these different departments, are all, one hopes, leaning into the professionalism. Let's look and see. We do like X. We do like Y. It would be convenient if the answer was Z, but let us be open. And that's where I think it's really important for the leader or the leaders to be role modeling that, saying, look, of course we're a Microsoft house. And of course, 9 times out of 10, Microsoft have a solution. But, let us look. Let us go into market and see. Okay, because in many cases, the value is going through this. You actually discover new things, right? You do research new things. So if you're doing it the right way, it can be really valuable. And the opportunity for vendors to influence through that process is real.
Great. One of the things that you talked about before was the budgeting process, going and asking for more money. Now, one of the questions I wrote down that I've got to ask you is can you help us understand the difference between build the bank and run the bank as kind of 2 different concepts?
Yes. It's always interesting when you're talking to vendors around this topic, because there is an assumption. In fact, the amount of times, James, I have been in the room where I have been challenging either as the exec, but more routinely when I'm not the exec, when I'm the advisor. And I say, why is a business model? Why have you constructed it this way? And I pull that string. We go through this dialogue, and it takes a little while, maybe across 30 minutes. And I'll say, yes, but why? And I'll keep on saying, why? Why is there a setup fee? Why is there this fee? Why is this fee? And you keep pulling that string, and eventually someone in the room says, but it's because they've got lots of money. And I say, right, really? Yes. And then some executive somewhere will then quote the X billion that their target customer made, last year in profit. Right. Okay. That doesn't mean they've got lots of money. The institution does, right? But the methodology of how they budget, right, and how they manage their cost and their cost to income, which is a key aspect here. Mr. Vendor, you typically are going to damage my cost to income ratio. And this is what we're all obsessing over in banks, right? How do you keep the cost down? Now, when you're running the bank, you have a particular cost. And when you're changing the bank, you have a different type of cost. Run the bank is always with us. So run the bank cost, your data center. Data center is a run the bank cost, right? I have to pay for it. Branches, employees, there is some flexibility. I can flex up and down with employees, right? But I can't flex up and down a data center. I can flex up and down my usage of AWS or Google or other cloud services. I can flex. The reality is probably I'm not going to, because there are very, very specific demands. So running the bank, that software, licenses, people, hardware, everything required to keep the show running. Okay. Now, you then arrive, Mr. Vendor, and say, hey, we've got this great piece of software and it does something. 9 times out of 10, depending on what it is, I'm going to have to change the bank. So I have a separate budget. I have a budget for running the bank, and that we're very focused on that, right? We've got to try and keep that as lean as possible, because that's the kind of costing that you begin to see in the annual reports of these banks, right? And that's why you have some investment analysts going, goodness me, that bank, their running cost is, 5 billion, right? And that's where you'll have some activist investors going, that needs to come down, right? So there's lots of pressure on run the bank costs. Now, change the bank costs are slightly different. They are good and bad. Good because that's where you can often get some supernormal profit as a vendor, right? Because I'm saying, look, I need to change the bank, and that means I'm going to change how I'm running things. So yes, I'm using this system and that system, this system, but I want to change that one here. I want to take this one out and put a new one in. Now I'm paying 10 million. You may not know this, right? We may not tell you, right? But I'm paying 10 million for this, and I reckon and your public figure is 1 million. So let's change the bank. Now, the cost involved in change, doing the scoping, doing the RFP, looking at what kind of committee meetings have to happen in order for us to discuss and decide. There's a whole lot of cost involved in changing that run model, right? To implement your software. So your software may save me 90% cost. Great. In run. But I'm going to have to spend 6 million, X million implementing it, right? And then testing it and making sure it's proper, removing the old one, decommissioning the old one, doing this, doing that, getting rid of the servers, bringing in new talent to run the stuff, etc., etc. And then I can get back to my run cost. So the banks are now, look, I don't want to go into too much anal detail here, James, but guide me. But I think it's very important that vendors understand there's a different approach here. You've got the run cost. That's really important to me. Changing it, I have a lot more flex. Obviously, I want to keep that cost down, but you'll see that in most annual reports, this is broken out. You've got the run cost and then the change cost, which are they start and stop. That's the important bit. And then, of course, in many cases, depending on the accounting, I'm able to defray a lot of that and that actual cost against, depending on the region and so on, against tax rules.
So I think the really valuable thing is, although there is the bank's finances, the run the bank and build the bank are they have separate forecasts and separate expectations, right. and understanding how those two pools of money work are quite helpful.
Yes.
I suppose, do you think it would be good or possible even to kind of reframe some of the bill of material to kind of stay inside the bank's targets on that? Or is that just creative accounting? Like, do you think that vendors can and should look to structure deals respecting the different budgets?
I think it's useful to be aware of it. Every institution, I'm struggling a little bit when I'm talking to you there because I want to try and give the most accurate answer possible. But every bank or every organization is structured slightly differently. They all have different CFOs. They all have different methodologies of defraying cost, explaining cost, taking cost. So it's really important to have those dialogues, right? And it's not offensive when you're talking to the bank to say, hey, look, how do you run your budgets? How can we help you, right? Because it may well be I can take a lot more cost up front in the change the bank budget, right? But I need my run the bank budget to be as small as possible. Now, you then have CapEx and OpEx. These are really important ones to understand. The capital expenditure, which usually can be defrayed against some degree of tax. There is some benefits there, but there's also some negatives. And then OpEx, operational expenditure, as in it's just a pure cost. It's a sunk cost. In many cases, we see a lot of change now in banks, whereby so much has moved to operational costs, run costs. Understanding how your targets run this, and once you've got a good dialogue going, you can then take a conversation, because it may well be, I have been told by CFO, look, do what you want within reason with the change fees, right? That's always going to stop. Right, and we can tell the market that, and we can tell the stakeholders and the shareholders, they understand we're going to change it and stop, right? run the bank, I need you to be really careful. That may be a dialogue I've had with CFO, in which case I'm going to make sure that all of our contractors, all of our interim, all of our people are going through that budget. And I may well be saying, okay, now look, I understand that you, vendor, you are trying to get me to do a 10-year contract that does it this way. Cool. No. And this is really interesting when you're with the sales teams and they go, what? No, sorry, that's non-negotiable. Cool, well then I'm not buying. I can't afford it. What? Goodbye. Right, I simply can't. Right, but if we can configure the contract to say, look, you're going to give me this thing and then that thing here, and then I'm going to do this cost. Yeah, let's talk. So maybe for example, I'm just being creative here. Maybe I buy a 10 million license fee from you, but the operational cost, the run cost for me is look. I'm thinking of banks that would do this. I'm thinking of banks that wouldn't. But being flexible, I think, is very, very important. I often see the vendors go to market and just say, this is how it's done. And in many cases, at that very important dialogue with the bank, it fails. Because we can't buy it that way.
That's gold, thanks you. And I would implore any salespeople listening to understand how this budgeting works up front, because what's going to happen when that RFP process starts, the governance is going to make it an arm's length engagement. So make sure you understand how their budgets work before that happens, because Absolutely. It gives you a chance to really optimize how you present your commercial offer, because you might not have a chance to refactor it a little bit later, get it right first time.
We'll often give you one chance because we've got, oh my God, there's no way we can do this. When we're looking, well, okay, then I'm thinking, okay, let me have a conversation. Right, and that's now down to how flexible were you, how friendly were you, and I'm speaking to you, because I'm going to say, look, you're going to make the money, right? We understand you want $1 million out of this, okay, right? And we want. Here's an interesting point that I think a lot of sales miss. I'm not trying to get your services free, cheap, right? I don't want to be nickel and diming you, right? If I'm a C-level or a serious person in banking, the last thing I need is a vendor that is giving me cheap services, right? Because then when stuff fails, right, I want it fixed. Stuff fails all the time in technology, but I want it fixed immediately. I want your best people. I don't want the Z team. I want your A team on this immediately, right? I want your A team on it because you are earning money, profit. I want you making profit. And often I'm in these meetings with these vendors going, look, I'm not trying to, I can't buy it this way. I could buy it this way. Now can you make that work? Because you don't really care as long as the money's arriving, okay? But here's how I'm going to buy it from you. And also, I use this phrase when I'm talking about money. I need you to make a profit. And a lot of the salespeople I'm interacting with go, you would say that. Yes, because if you're not making a profit, how are you going to deliver me the best possible service for my customers, right? I don't want to be telling the regulator, oh, it's because I bought the cheap one, right? And I didn't buy a support contract from them. Sorry, right? It's really important. But how I define this is, look, we all want 3 meals a day, and right, 3 meals a day, not 4. Okay, 3 meals. So my expectation is you should be making money from us. Yes, we want you to turn a profit. We want you to be thinking of our bank positively, right? Because you can see the ramifications for banks that do it the other way, or any company that does it the other way, right? If you're really slow in paying really crap in negotiations, being really, really difficult, it does not help you in the future. So 3 meals a day, but not 4, right? Okay, so we're expecting a good deal from you, okay, but we're still expecting you to make money.
Brilliant. And in terms of things you think salespeople should be doing, you gave a great example a little bit earlier, which was teach banks how to buy your technology. Are there any other pearls of wisdom that you can share, like tips that you'd love to give salespeople, like make sure that you do this?
I think it's just now and again, I would often go out to many different vendors and say, look, I need my colleagues. We all need to be educated on what's going on in the market. Now, that's good if you've got individuals saying that, right? And I would say, look, could you please come in? Would you? And I'd think of a big vendor. Would you just come in and just tell us what's happening, right? And I'll tell my management teams and colleagues, look, I'm sorry, because we all hate having to take time out of the proper work. Come here. We're just going to listen to Microsoft, Oracle, vendor A, vendor B, right? And let's just hear what's moving, right? So we're going to learn. So one of now, not everyone does this. I think it's business critical. I think it's really important to ensure your teams are learning from the market, right? I will often, metaphorically kick my colleagues out of the office to go to conferences, please. Go and learn, go and listen, go and sit. You stop worrying today about, core banking or whatever. Just go and listen and learn, and see what other vendors are doing there out at conferences and so on and so on. But we bring vendors in. Even if that's not happening, I would encourage the vendor to be thinking about how do we learn, right? You may not be aware of it, but you have phenomenally good insight into what's moving in the market, because what they're doing is of interest to me. I don't need to know the name, and in many cases, I don't want to know the name of the bank, right? But what others are doing, here's some insight, Ewan. Oh. Right, so reach out. By all means, reach out. That's where roundtables, events, activities, podcasts, all these kind of dialogues where you can get in the room and have a good conversation with the executive. Those are really important. But I think even on your website, even on your social, just making clear, here's what we're seeing in the market. That's gold dust to us, because we need to understand what's going on. There is an assumption that we are in banks, and often that may be that may be encouraged by the banks. There's an assumption that we are, amazing, omnipotent. That is not generally the case, right? So we don't know what's moving until someone tells us, right? So we will often have teams that are out there searching and looking and briefing us. We'll have third-party experts coming in and telling us what's going on. But there's nothing better than hearing from vendor, look, here's what we are doing for these guys. Really? Yeah. They completely moved the core here, put it there, put it in the cloud, and now they went from $20 a user, core banking cost per year, to $1. What? Yes. All right. No, don't say who, but how credible are they? Is this some small bank in a corner, or is it? No, it's a tier 1. Oh, it's a tier 2. Wow. Okay, that's it. How did they do that? Well, if you like, we could maybe connect you.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
There's a good comment around that. It's what I call intellectual philanthropy. And what's interesting, because you're talking about content, and one of the things that every executive that I know has in common at banks is they all consume massive amounts of content. And sometimes it's a podcast, sometimes it's McKinsey reports, and sometimes it's keynotes at events. But they are all they have a voracious appetite for that sort of stuff. So yeah, again, vendors, another reminder, if you needed any, of the power of content. And just to to move us towards the end, I've got to ask the opposite side of that question, Ewan, which is, what are the things that salespeople do that drive you mental? Like, what's going to get you ghosted if you did that?
Oh, that's good points. Generic stuff. Hi, Ewan. You look like someone who'd be interested in buying our latest. Oh no, please. I think any degree of pressure. Right, I've got enough of that. I've got absolutely enough of that. Right, I've got more than that. I've got pressure coming from family. Right, that's one dimension, but really I've got pressure coming from everywhere. So I did have one. Well, here's an interesting one here. Where they were big US vendor. We can only hold these. I just want to try and get the phrasing right. We can only hold these pricing. This is 2022 pricing. We can only hold this for another 6 days, and they're on the phone to our project management team. You better get your guy. You better. We're only going to. And I'll need to speak to some guy in America. So they come into my office. So and so have been on the phone, and we need to do something right now. What? Oh no, they've been on the phone, and we'll only get the 2021 pricing if we sign and we start speaking to them now. Okay, well, I don't care. No, but the pricing, we'll only get it now. I mean, they will hold it. Okay, well, I don't care. No. No, and they come back. He's phoned the CEO, and the CEO has said that they're prepared to wait another 10 days. And eventually I'm having to get these people in the room, my team, and then in some cases this vendor, and say, just so we're very clear, I don't care. No, but we want to offer you the best. Pricing isn't the only thing here, guys, right? Okay, so you know, it doesn't work on me. It might work on her, might work on him. Doesn't work on me, right? Move away with your pressure, right?
And more importantly, one of the things that you pointed out so accurately earlier, Ewan, is it's the whole business. It's not like you going, oh, that's a great deal, let me grab my fountain pen and sign the contract here and here. You know,
I can't.
There are more
cases.
people involved than just you deciding on whim.
Yes. Yeah. So that one then, look, I think when you're not helping me, right? So help me understand. Quite an important one here is, in many cases, I won't reply. That doesn't necessarily mean I've ghosted. It just means, right, it's quite annoying, right, because I've got 500 things happening on a right, and then the sales guy who thinks they have a relationship with me, and I do have a relationship, right? They're like, oh, he's just not responded, you know. Well, you know, this is my last time I'm going to email you, or yeah, this is the second last time you clearly don't, please. That gets quite annoying. And often what has happened is I have then actually ghosted that, right? When it's not that I'm so please, when I do reach out, it's not I was ignoring you. No, I had other priorities. Now I have the ability to speak to you. And the last thing I need is, I'll maybe, you know, I think I may have said this to James, like where the guys, actually, he will then delay speaking to me, right? Because he thought I was ghosting. That's often not the case. So work on the basis that you're not ghosted. It's just, please, you know, maybe I'm reading, I'm scanning, right? That's non-core, right? Because he's screaming at me right now. CEO's screaming, the regulator's demanding, I've got to travel here, I don't have time to think. But, you know, keeping that communication going, I think is useful. You know, don't overdo it, but, you know, hey, Ewan, I hope you're well, trust all's well. You know, I think that's the right way on a regular basis to be engaging. And then when I do respond, don't treat me like an infidel, all right? Please, you know, it's just because I'm having a very difficult time and you aren't priority, unfortunately.
And this is why I think this session is so valuable, is a lot of the time salespeople think that they've been ghosted when actually, you know, the gap between you deciding you probably will do something and creating the RFP, you've got to do all of the requirements gathering that you talked about earlier, and that's like a 3-month exercise. So, you know, the salesperson expects it to go from, you know, with a cadence of a meeting every 2 weeks, but you've got to move mountains in the background.
See, yeah, what you could be doing, if you're really serious, and in many cases, if I'm working for a big bank, I understand that we mean something, right? And you've got people you've got to brief as well, right, on status. Then help me. Fly in, you know, to offer to take me for coffee. Now, I will routinely go, I'm sorry, I can't, I hope you're well, right? Connection made, right? Okay? Now, a lot of people think I'm nuts by saying, you know, fly into the capital city where I am and engage me. Right, or be there and just say, hey, I'm in Copenhagen, I'm in London, I hope you're well, and let me know if I can pop by for a conversation, or I don't know, drop off a donut, you know, hope you're well, right? And you know, hey, thanks for the donut, yeah, very kind of you, sorry. I think that, you know, how can you help me engage with it, right? Because I'm busy, and it's just not right now. But there's really good techniques I think you can use, and that will cost $300 for a flight, right? $200 for a hotel, and many salespeople go, and many CROs, chief revenue officers, we don't do that. It's about engaging and keeping that really fine, and speak to some other competitors, right? Be in the market, but you know, how do you unlock me when I'm really busy, and it's non-core, when I'm doing all these organizing to come for the RFP? Keep that dialogue with me, even if it's one way, and then figure out, where am I speaking, right? Because my position is I am required to go and speak, right? CEO will say, go and speak here, right? Okay, or the regulator says, you must be here, and you must be there, or whatever. Or we have a client requirement, we have a particular... a lot of this stuff is public. Go there, be there, say hi, right? And go, oh yes, hi, how are you doing? And then you'll see that I haven't ghosted you, it's just, I was busy.
Brilliant. Ewan, there's so much we could talk about, and you run workshops both for banks on how they can adopt technology, but you also do the same for vendors on how they can engage. So could you tell us a little bit about what someone could expect, what a SaaS CEO could expect from one of your workshops?
I really enjoy doing these, and it's only since last year when I've been working with Fintech. And I'm saying, how are you getting on with banks? Oh, it's very difficult. Well, yes, it is. But how are you engaging? Oh, and then I realized that maybe there's a misunderstanding on how the vendor is thinking, and then the bank executives are thinking. So I really enjoy that opportunity to contribute and to challenge. And so I do these a lot, where I'm sitting with either the C-level or the sales and marketing teams and saying, look, how are you doing this? And they'll say, oh, here's an example, and they'll give me the example. Say, all right, have you tried this? Have you tried that? So it's something. There's a thing inside. It really, really helps me because I want the banks to succeed. I've been there, and I want these fintech to succeed as well, right? Because I can see the value on both sides. So the opportunity to say, look, you might want to think about this, or have you tried that? I really enjoy this. Sometimes it's just a one-off. Other times an ongoing advisory approach. But I really enjoy it, James.
Yeah, and I would say to any CRO of a SaaS business, if you don't have a laundry list of questions that you are itching to ask a chief digital officer from a bank, there's something wrong. Ewan, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I could talk with you all day. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been incredible.
Oh, thanks for having me on, James. Good to see you again, man.